And let's get a songbook, turn over to 527. 527. Now, I know you've heard the song. There's been groups that have sang the song. I think the Chavez has sang the song, God Wants to Hear You Sing. And I've seen some of you head nodding when they sing that song in agreement. So let's act like it tonight. I believe that's a true song. God wants to hear us sing. And so let's do that tonight. Let's all stand. And 527, I Know Whom I Have Believed. We'll sing the first, second, and last verse.
I know not why God's wondrous grace to me He hath made known, nor why unworthy Christ in love redeemed me for His own. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day. I know not how this saving faith to me did impart, nor how believing in His word brought peace within my heart. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day. I know not when my Lord may come at night or noonday fair, nor if I walk the veil with Him or meet Him in the air. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that He is able to keep that which I committed unto Him against that day.
Great singing, and appreciate you being here tonight. You see, we're without our song leader, but Pastor picked up right where he left off years ago and just moved the mic over, turned it on, and we're all good. So we'll follow his lead tonight, but appreciate you being here. And let's bow for prayer. I'm going to ask Jackie if he'll pray for us. Amen. You may be seated. Let's turn over to 571. 571 and slow it up just a little bit. Trust and Obey. Good invitation song. A good song to reflect on as we sing. 571, Trust and Obey.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, while the glory He sheds in our way, while we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but His smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sigh nor a tear can abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet we will sit at his feet, or we'll walk by his side in the way. What he says we will do, where he sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.
386. We'll sing one more tonight. 386. Sing about the Holy Spirit and his role, his ministry. The Comforter has come. 386.
Oh, spread the tidings round, wherever man is found, wherever human hearts and human woes abound. Let every Christian tongue proclaim the joyful sound, the Comforter has come. The Comforter has come. The Comforter has come. The Holy Ghost from heaven, the Father's promise given. Oh, spread the tidings round, wherever man is found. The Comforter has come. The long, long night is past. The morning breaks at last, and hush the dreadful wail and fury of the blast. As o'er the golden hills the day advanceth fast, the Comforter has come. The Comforter has come. The Comforter has come. The Holy Ghost from heaven, the Father's promise given. Oh, spread the tidings round, wherever man is found. The Comforter has come. Oh, boundless love divine, how shall this tongue of mine to wandering mortals tell the matchless grace divine, that I, a child of hell, should in his image shine. The Comforter has come. The Comforter has come. The Comforter has come. The Holy Ghost from heaven, the Father's promise given. Oh, spread the tidings round, wherever man is found. The Comforter has come.
All right, we're going to take our offering. Just a reminder, this Saturday there's a couple things going on. It's June 5th, is this Saturday, I believe, right? Yes. And so we're having a men's prayer breakfast here, 9 a.m., and then you're welcome to come over for a get-together over at Putnamville, and that starts at 12, I believe, at Putnamville, with food, lunch, and Brother McBride preaching. Both of those are men gatherings, so men's prayer breakfast and then a men's preaching and lunch and shooting and so forth over at Putnamville. That's all Saturday, and so I want to make you aware of that. June 8th, the following Tuesday, will be ladies' meeting at 6:30 here in the fellowship hall. So we're going to take our offering now, and then the choir is going to come and sing. We pulled out some of the old ones. If you haven't been here for years, they're going to be new to you. They were contemporary when I was a child. This one we're going to sing tonight in the upper room. I believe it's a Gaither song. So the choir, if you'll come as the ushers go back, we're going to sing for you tonight. I'm going to ask Rich if he'll pray for the offering.
Well, it is good to see everybody. There they all go. They're just as happy as could be to get out of here. We got our entertainment, whatever he is, back there in the back, blocking them as they go out. But it's good to have you here tonight. We're going to be in the book of Psalms, chapter number 143 tonight. I was thinking about this. Has got nothing to do with the service, nothing else, but funny things happen. And I think you ought to see things as funny. You ought to, anyhow. And this week, I was back just down this little road over here somewhere. There's a little graveyard that I've been mowing for several years, and it's coming up on Memorial Day. And I said to myself, Self, you need to get down there and get that mowed. But you know, I just shouldn't be out. I shouldn't be allowed out doing stuff anymore. And I'm down there, and I don't like bees. I don't like wasps. And about July and August, there starts being a whole bunch of nests of bees down there. And yellow jackets come up. About one year, I had 13 different nests that come up, and so needless to say, I get stung a lot, and I hate that. And so I'm always a little nervous. Well, I know this kind of early in the year, and there's no bees, but there is these crazy cicadas, locusts out there. And I've got a nose that's about the size of a landing strip, and they don't know it's not a landing strip. They don't see good. And so I'm on this zero turn, and you can't take your hands off there, and all of a sudden, wham, right in the nose. And I'm looking eye to eye to one of these things. At first, I thought it was a wasp, and I about ran over the tombstones, and I finally got control of myself. And he wasn't going to go nowhere. He was content to sit there on that landing strip, so I had to get him off my face. And then a little bit later, I don't even know, some hard shell, big old black bug, he stuck right on the side of the landing strip. And I thought, I'm going to have to wear a nose cover to get out here and mow. And then a little while later, a third bug hit me, and I finally got done out of there. And I can't do anything anymore. I'm getting attacked by bugs anymore. So that's got nothing to do with this, but it was a funny thought for this week. And if you'd have seen me when that first bug hit me, in my reactions, I think it might be close to what Jackie Ivers would do if he ran over a snake. Because I seen a little bit of video of him when he ran over a snake in his mail vehicle, and be honest with you, he's a little bit crazier than I am, just so you'll know that. So if you ever see a snake, don't take it toward him, and don't take it toward Aaron. Aaron screams like a girl when he sees one. And so now with all that said, we're in Psalms 143. You've got your education on people now. Tonight we're talking about dealing with our disappointments. And David writes this in Psalms 143, and I want you to listen and try to picture, and I always try to picture when I'm reading things what people are feeling, what they're going through, what's going on around them. But here's David. It says, "For the enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness, as those that have been long dead. Therefore is my spirit overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is desolate." Now, that's one of God's people. In fact, that's one of God's best people that's feeling like this. Now, the word disappointment is not in there, but it pretty well describes his experience here. And I thought about this. We all make plans. We've all got dreams. We set goals. But are those plans, are they going to materialize, or are they going to end up in failure? Is our trust in different people, is it always going to be rewarded? You see, the only certain thing I guess you could say about life is that it's uncertain. You don't really know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We make plans. You ought to make plans. You ought to have some ideas of some things you want to do and accomplish in life, but you have no guarantee all those things are going to happen. So our plans and our dreams and our goals, they might end in great victory, and they might end in frustrating defeat. And those people that we put our trust in, that we consider our friends, they may remain loyal, and they may betray our confidence. That's just life. That's the nature of life. And in fact, I've always said this. I think for the most part, life's pretty good. I enjoy life. But every now and then, there's dispersed in there disappointments, things that happen that you wasn't looking for, things that you just soon didn't never happen, but they do happen. And now there are other people that look at it the other way. They say life's pretty bad, and every now and then I have a good moment. And I would hate to be one of those. I'd hate to think of it that way. But I do think because of that, it's important we learn how to deal with disappointments, because I think sometimes we struggle with that and we don't know what to do. So I'll give you a little English. This is not good English for me, but I'll give you a little bit of it. It's called disappointment. Now, dis just simply means to separate or to part asunder. So I'm thinking to myself, a disappointment is I had something planned, I had an appointment, and it didn't happen. Something kept it from happening. Something messed it up. And so it ended up with me not having what I planned, and so I'm dissatisfied. I'm disappointed. I'm in anguish. And it's something that tears us up. When we get torn apart from an appointment, torn apart from what we planned, it messes us up sometimes. And I would say this, I do not believe we will ever be able in life to avoid disappointment. I don't know of anybody in my life that I've ever talked to that has been able to say, I've never been disappointed in my life. But I can say this, you don't have to be defeated by it. I understand it's going to happen, it's going to come. And I don't mean that as to the sense, and I have to be careful not to look too far on. I expect things to go wrong sometimes too far wrong. Sometimes I know somebody's going to fail. I know they're going, and I just expect them to fail. I don't know if that's a good thing either. But I would say this: a lot of times the negative feelings or the negative vibes or whatever that surrounds disappointment, it's more in our minds than it is in reality. A lot of times it's not that big of a deal, but we make it more. And it's not so much the event, but it's the way we interpret the event that causes so much pain. And so I want to talk to you tonight about two areas of disappointment that we often experience, and then a little bit of how we can cope with that. And you probably already know the areas in where you've been disappointed in life, and I'll start with the very first one. It's the area of circumstances. I see that in the life of Moses. Now, you can turn there if you want in Acts chapter number 7. If not, I think I've given the verses to my wife. They'll be up here. But this is a little bit about the story of Moses, and I'm talking about disappointing circumstances. Many of you know the story of Moses. I'm not going to read it all tonight, or you would all be disappointed because it's a long story and you'd be here longer than you want. So I won't do that, but I'll give you some updates up and through there, and we'll read some verses here and there from the book of Acts here. But if you'll remember, when Moses, he attempted to identify with his people. He'd been there in the king's palace. He knew who his people was. He tried to identify with them. He tried to identify with their troubles, and there were things going on in Egypt, and he supposed things were going to turn out better. And it was supposed to turn out better, but it didn't. Surely, in his mind, he thought, they're going to look to me as a liberator. I'm going to try to help them, and they're going to think he's a good guy. And I think about that, and as I read through that story there in the book of Acts in my mind, at least he was prepared. I mean, I'll mention a few things. One, he was educated. It wasn't like he just ran out there and said, hey, I'm going to do something. He was an educated person. He was a very gifted individual. Verse 22 there, if you're in Acts 7, if not, it's up here, I think. It says, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. Now, I don't know the school that he went to. I call it Egypt University, but he went there. He did well. He was very educated, very intelligent. He knew what was going on. He understood the situation. And I believe Moses was very confident when he decided what he's going to do, that he was going to be successful. I think that he was ready to change the world. And so, again, I'm thinking about how circumstances can be disappointing. And for Moses, he's got a plan. He was very educated, very gifted, but he was also very sincere. It wasn't that he just didn't have anything to do. It wasn't that he was getting paid for this job. He was sincere in his emotions. He was sincere in his motives. He really wanted to help his people to get out of the trouble they was in. It says in verse number 23, and when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart, not just a thought, not just something passing, but in his heart, to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian. And so his heart's in what he's doing. He's got everything. Again, he's thinking about what's going on. God's using him, or it seems that he is. And I'm thinking about how he's qualified to do something here, and yet his circumstances turned out very disappointing. He also had a heart for the plight, the trouble they was in. He hadn't forgotten what his parents had taught him. He had been raised by his parents, although he belonged to Pharaoh and to a certain extent. But he fully expected that these people, the Hebrews, would understand what he was doing. They would appreciate his efforts. In fact, it says in verse 25, for he supposed that his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. Now, I'm talking about disappointing circumstances. And so when I read that, and when it says he supposed, to me that's past tense. To me, it's like you and I do many times. I think Moses played this through his head. I'm going to go out there, and I'm going to find a way to get these people out of Egypt. And they're going to appreciate that. And they're going to sing songs about me. They're going to do some of these things. And he supposed in his mind he'd played it out and there was a good ending. And I think everything went good in his mind, but then it really happened. And instead of getting the praise, instead of getting the songs written about him, he got scorned. Verse 28 and 26, I guess, says, "And the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren. Why do ye wrong one to another? But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday?" Can you imagine the shock to his system? He thinks he's helping his people. He thinks he's trying to get them in a better place. He's trying to get them out of there. And there's people in your life you've probably tried to help, and you thought you was doing good to them, and then they turn on you, then they say things. This is a bad circumstances. Moses was shocked. It didn't work out the way he planned. In fact, he even gets sort of threatened by some of his own people, and so he leaves in disappointment. Verse 29 says, "Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush." Now, think about this. I'm talking about life's disappointing circumstances. Moses had it made. He was born, and the king said, "I want every Hebrew son killed," and they didn't kill him. And it ended up he got to live in Pharaoh's house. He got to live in the palace. He was taken care of. He had all the position he would ever need. In fact, I'm told Pharaoh had no sons, so likely he would have been a ruler. So he had that. He had power. He had authority. He had education. And he had God helping him. God was on his side and standing behind him. And here he was living in Pharaoh's house with all the comforts. And now he's on the backside of the desert, a drifter, with nothing really going for him at all in life. If I looked at, I'm going to say that's quite a bit of a letdown. That's quite a bit of disappointment. Some of you can say, you know what, I think earlier in years in my life, I thought this was going to happen, this was going to happen, and a lot of those things never come about. It just didn't work out, and we're disappointed. And certainly circumstances did not work out for Moses the way he thought. And again, I would have to think there's probably some of us, if we would give testimony here tonight, there's been a lot of situations in our life where we felt sort of like Moses. The circumstances kind of fell in around us, sort of like the walls of Jericho, and kind of left us trapped. We was there, and it seemed there was no escape, seemed there was no deliverance for us. Could I tell you what will happen when that goes on in your life? For one, Satan is right there. And 2, your old flesh is right there, and both of them will do this. They'll help turn you bitter. They'll help turn you against everything and against everybody. That's what they do. They'll turn you toward bitterness, and disappointment will kill your zeal. Even some of God's people have been disappointed in church and in pastors and other people in churches, and today they have no zeal for God. It's turned them against God. It's turned them where they have preachers. Listen, just because somebody stands behind a pulpit doesn't mean you can trust them. They're people, and some of them are just as low down as people everywhere, and so people get disappointed. And so now their zeal has gone for God. Their love towards someone, their love towards something, their love toward working and serving God, it's gone. And I have seen people walk away that were otherwise good people, but they were disappointed in circumstances. I can't tell you how many people I have visited and knocked on their doors, and they will tell stories. I used to be in church, but this happened, and I got away from God. I got out of church. And a lot of them will never admit that they're wrong now. Could I tell you, if disappointment in other people causes you to get away from God, you're still wrong. You're still out of place. And that's what happens. And I read this story. It was humorous, so I put it in here. It was about, I don't even know how to say his name. He was a composer, Johannes Brahms, I think is how it was. And I don't know anything about his music or anything. I probably play some of it, just don't know it. But I do know this: he loved food. And he took ill one day, and so he went to visit his doctor. And after his doctor examined him and figured out what was going on, he told him, he said, "You immediately have to go on this very strict diet so we can cure this illness." Well, it didn't set right with him, and he said, here's what he said. He said, "But this evening I'm dining with Strauss." That was another great composer, by the way. Says, "And we're having chicken paprika," or however you say it, paprika. It is one of my favorites. And the doctor said, "It's out of the question. You cannot have that. You have to go onto this diet immediately." And so he was greatly disappointed. And here's what he decided. He said, "Okay, let's do this, Doc. Let's imagine that I didn't come and consult you till tomorrow. And he went ahead and went. Yeah, see, he had a way of getting over his disappointment. It doesn't always work that easy. It's not always that easy to get over disappointing circumstances in our life. Sometimes they can push us to the point where we just don't see any tomorrows coming. I can give you examples of people here from our church in the past that went through some things, and we don't always know what to do when things don't turn out the way they're supposed to, when they don't turn out the way we have them planned. All of us could stand up and name things that we thought was going to work this way. We thought this was going to work out, and it didn't happen. And it worked out different. And sometimes we think, I don't know how to go on. I don't know what else to do. So we can be disappointed by circumstances. Here's some things I want to give you to remember when you're having to deal with disappointing circumstances. Number one, remember that God is sovereign. Is that important? Very important. You see, God is not controlled by circumstances. He's in control of all circumstances. Now, he does not make everything happen, but he allows everything that happens. There's nothing that's ever happened to you that God didn't know about. So if he knew about it, then he allowed it. And so he has control of everything. And we set ourselves up for disappointment when we forget that God's still in control. When we forget that things don't just happen, he allowed them for some reason. Now, I don't always know that reason. But the outcome is always in his hands. And Moses proves what happens and how you can push yourself to disappointment when you start assuming the authority yourself, when you start taking things into your own hands and you start assuming certain privileges and certain rights that are not yours. And rejection comes when you get ahead of God. Rejection comes when you go beyond our place that God has given us. And so it happens sometimes. So I would remember, God's still sovereign. And you may be disappointed right now in something that's going on, some circumstance in your life, but I will tell you this, God's still in control, and he may change it in a direction you like one of these days, but he may not. But the fact is, it's not out of his control. And that brings me to a second thing to remember when I'm disappointed in circumstances. He's also got a plan and a purpose for my life. It's not just things happening, I have no idea. Now, I may not have the idea of what's happening, but God has a plan. And you probably heard this story. It's been several years back now, but I still had it in my notes, and I was looking through it this week, so I put it in here. There was a surfer. She was a teenager then. I don't know how old she is now, but she was a teenage surfer from Hawaii. Her name was Bethany Hamilton, and she lost an arm to a 1,500-pound shark. Now, I don't know about you, but that would kind of deter me just a little bit from certain things. But she was so upbeat after she'd lost her arm that people was kind of amazed at her response and how quick. And here's what she said. She said, "This was God's plan for my life, and I'm just going to go with it." Now, that sounded like a pretty difficult way to go about it, and she didn't seem disappointed. And I'm sure she had moments where she wanted to be down, and I'm sure she had times, but she didn't show that. And she just told people, listen, God had a reason for letting this happen, and I'm going to live with it. And I read that story again, and it said that 3 months after she lost her arm, she was back out surfing competitively. I wouldn't even be in a boat 3 months after I lost my arm to a shark. And we wouldn't live on an ocean. We wouldn't be anywhere around that. And so here is a young lady who saw her tragedy as an opportunity to inspire others about God's care, and she continued to go. And it reminded me of some verses. The Bible says in Psalms 37 that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Proverbs 16 says a man's heart devises his way, but the Lord directs his steps. And so our disappointments in life, sometimes they can teach us some lessons. And I often use a verse at funerals over from the book of Ecclesiastes where he says it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. What's that mean, preacher? I learn a whole lot more in serious times than I do in the happy times, in the party times. A lot of things stick with me a lot more in troubled times. And in fact, Paul says, listen to what Paul says in Philippians. He says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I've learned." So in other words, this is something, I didn't know this. He said, but I had to learn this, that I've learned that in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I'm instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. So Paul is what he's saying, you know what, I chose to learn from my disappointments, and it's helped me. I'm better off for them. You and I can do that. And so, and again, I would say, if I'm disappointed with circumstances, I need to remember, first of all, God's still in control of things. Life's not out of control. I'll be honest with you, I'm disappointed in I started voting in the 70s when I was just getting ready to get out of high school. And every year, or every 4 years, not even every 4 years, every 2 years, whenever we get ready, I get more disappointed every time. I see the way people think in this country, and how do people think like that? My wife, until just a few weeks ago, had Facebook. She finally got off of it, and some of the people we had on there are people I used to go to school with, and I thought they were in fact, they were pretty intelligent people. And they were a lot more intelligent than I was. And yet I look at things that they put on there and things they say. How can anybody that lives in a free country like this think like that? And I'm glad that first part, God is sovereign. I'm glad I can remember that, because otherwise I think I would go to some of these people's houses and tell them, I think I'm going to have to choke you because you're crazy. But I don't need to do that because God's still in charge. And so, but the fact is, it is amazing, and we have to remember those things, that God is sovereign, and He's got a plan. He's got a purpose. I don't have to understand it, but He's got a plan. And then I need to remember that the way I see things is many times different from the way God sees them. We're not on the same level. We're not even close. And I'm pretty short-sighted. God's far-sighted. My perspective is many times different from God's. And in fact, I would say it this way. There's a whole lot of difference. If you ever got to ride in an airplane, and I love them, some people don't, but I love them. If you ever get to ride in a plane, there's a whole lot of difference between being down here on the ground and looking up at a thunderstorm coming than being in a plane flying over the top of one and looking down at it. God's above all those things. And you and I can be sometimes, but things that disappoint me, they do so because sometimes I don't see God's plan and I don't see His hand working in my life. Doesn't mean it's not working. It's just I can't see it sometimes. And in fact, I could give you a lot of examples. And so, but I like how a lot of people said this down through the years. I've read this so many places. But our disappointments are actually God's appointments. He's got those things set up for us, and He's trying to accomplish His will and His purpose in our lives. And a good example, that would be Joseph there in the Old Testament. Now, I don't know. Joseph did so well for the years that he went through so much trouble. I never see where he blamed God. I never see where he got angry at God. It's almost like he knew this all along. But he said it years later. He said, after he went through so many disappointments, he said this: God meant it for good. Now, I can say that a lot right now about things that I've been through in the past, but while I was going through it, I'm not sure I could have said it. But I kind of think Joseph did. I kind of think Joseph all along, he knew that it was God's plan, and God means something for good. But we have to try to see God's plan, and we have to try to see His hand in our circumstances, in our disappointments. But here's the problem. I cannot always see His hand, and I cannot always see His plan. So what do I have to do? I have to trust His heart. I have to know that, you know what? I can trust God even if I don't understand it. I can trust God in these things. And think about Moses. We talked about how he was disappointed in his circumstances, things that worked out. But let's think about how his life changed as he dealt with disappointments in his life. For his first 40 years, Moses thought he was something. At the end of his second 40 years, he realized, I'm nothing. And then he spent the last 40 years of his life learning that God was everything. And again, I say it this way: life's disappointments are simply God's appointments to help us. But there's a second area of disappointment in our life. It's not just circumstances, it's people. People disappoint us. Now we could all stand up and give testimony here. A lot of things happen. And in fact, the psalmist says in Psalms 118, he says it's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. Now that doesn't mean we shouldn't have friends, and doesn't mean we shouldn't trust people, but you ought to trust God a whole lot more. In a lifetime, everybody is going to be disappointed by a person or people sometime. It's inevitable. You can't live unless you live a very short life. You're not going to get by without being disappointed in people. And again, I just have to go to Moses' life to get examples of this. He didn't just experience disappointing situations, but he had his share of disappointments with people. You remember when he was disappointed with Aaron? I'll give you the story. We won't read it, but it's over in chapter 32 of Exodus. He goes up to the top of Mount Sinai to meet with God and get the 10 Commandments, and he leaves Aaron in charge down below. And he didn't come back quite as soon as, I don't know why it took him so long. I kind of got in my mind, you get in the presence of God right there, you might stay a little longer. You might not be in such a hurry. If God ever really moved into a church service, we might be here till 8 or 9 at night and nobody would complain. Can you imagine that? But I just don't know. But he didn't come down as quick as they expected. So the people got impatient, and so they got to putting pressure on Aaron. We need something. He made them a golden calf, and they had this immoral party. We're not getting into all that and worship that it was completely. And can you imagine how disappointed Moses was? He's been in the presence of God. He leaves his brother down here to help and to take care of everything. And when he comes back, this is what they're doing. They're completely away from God. In fact, he was so upset that he threw the stone tablets down and broke them. And then when he confronted Aaron with the failure, Aaron, it's not my fault. Now, I've always been amazed at this. I'm going to read this verse, and I want you to try to picture this in your mind. This is Aaron's excuse to Moses. And I said unto them, whosoever hath any gold, let him break it off. So they gave it me. Then I cast it into the fire, and there came out this calf. I think he might believe in evolution too. I hear people all the time, they think everything we've got just evolved, it just blowed up into this and became this. Well, here he said, I just throwed all this jewelry in the fire and out come this calf. Now, it would take a real idiot to believe that, but evidently he thought his brother was, because that was the story he gave to Moses. And so, you see, Aaron was supposed to be on the same level with Moses pretty well. He was supposed to be in help leading. He was given to Moses to be a spokesperson for the people, and it was the team of Moses and Aaron that was supposed to lead the people out of Egyptian bondage, but he failed. Could I tell you, there's going to be people in your life that's going to hurt you through a lack of character. And that's what I see here of Aaron. Lack of character, moral failure. Do you know some? I can name some. People that I really looked up to that had failed, and it's difficult sometimes. It's difficult when you think of someone that highly, and then they fall so far. But the fact is, we cannot force our values and our beliefs on others, but we can live our lives before them, and pray for them, and hope that they follow, and that they try to follow after God. And so he was disappointed in Aaron. Another time over in Numbers chapter number 12, he was disappointed in Aaron again, but he's also disappointed in his sister, Miriam. And I'll read some verses. It says, and Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. For he had married an Ethiopian woman, and they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very weak above all the men which are upon the face of the earth. I'd read more, but here's what's happened. Obviously, his brother and his sister didn't like who he chose for a wife. Now that happens in a lot of families. Most people do not get along good with their in-laws compared to their regular blood family. They have something wrong about an in-law, something about a sister-in-law, she's this, and they're always quick to tell you. And that's sort of where he was here. It wasn't that they didn't like Moses, but that woman he chose to marry, we don't like her, and she... Evidently, some other people had complained about it if you read the whole story, but they took advantage of this time and of this situation to challenge Moses' leadership. He's the one in charge. They said, hey, God's not just speaking through him, he speaks through us. We're leaders too, we're here. And again, I'm thinking about how people disappoint us. First, he disappointed him by his morality and his character. Now he's a disappointment, him and his sister, because there's no loyalty. They turned on him. They turned on their brother. And those who were the closest to him in the flesh, members of his own family, were the ones who seemed to disappoint him the most. Jesus said this, said a prophet is not without honor save in his own country and his own house. You see, when you get betrayed by someone, it has to be someone on the inside, like a close friend, someone like a family member, someone, a fellow worker. And that's what happened. And I thought, I still remember when I started pastoring, I had certain things. I thought if I can pray so much and do so much study and do so much, I hear all these stories from preachers about you'll go through this and you'll have these troubles and all, and I never believed it. I didn't think it was necessary. I didn't think it was ever going to happen. And one day I had a fellow walk into my office, and he was close to me, close friend, and he started telling me what all I'd done wrong. I didn't know where he was coming from. And finally, it started adding up in my head what he was saying. And I knew now why he was thinking this, but that he hadn't heard what the truth was. He'd heard a wrong version of it. And so I said, well, no, you've misunderstood. I said, let's talk about this. And he turned around and said, I don't need to talk about it. And he never come back. Now, I'll tell you, I thought he was loyal to the church. I thought he was loyal to God. I thought he was loyal. He wasn't loyal to nothing. But it does bother you. It is disappointing. And it's even worse nowadays. Don't do that to me tonight because I don't sleep well when people do those things. But it's amazing how those things happen. And you don't think it would ever happen. But I've seen a lot of people, and you've seen it too, how quickly family ties are forgotten for personal gain. I had a funeral here just this last week, and some people, some good people that I know, but I also know that the family doesn't get along very well. In fact, they admitted that to me, and I thought of some of the reasons. And I thought of a while back, I had a situation where a person died, and as soon as that person died, it was obvious from among the siblings left that they all wanted a little more than what they should have got out of what belonged to mom and dad. And those things, I guess it's natural, I guess it's normal because it happens all the time, but I still don't understand it. I don't see it, but it's disappointment. There's no loyalty. There's no care for people. But Moses, he wasn't the only one that suffered disappointment. You can read there in your Bible, and again, I'm giving you stories tonight, but we're not reading them because I don't want to disappoint you. But in 2 Kings chapter number 5, there's a story of Elisha, and he's disappointed by his servant Gehazi. And you remember the story here. Naaman comes to Elisha, and Elisha clears him and cleans him of leprosy. Tells him to go down and dip in the Jordan, and he does that, and he comes back clean. And he said, "Listen, let me pay you for this. He was appreciative of what he'd done, but Elisha wanted him to know that this is something from God. You don't pay for it. You're just grateful for it, and you accept that, and you go on and you serve God." And so he wouldn't accept anything, but his servant got thinking, "This fellow's got a lot. And there ain't no sense in him taking all of that back and him having a lot and me not having a lot." So he caught up with him, and he lied to him and sort of made it sound like his master had changed his mind, and he got payment. And he personally profited from something that God had done for somebody else. Could I tell you, Elisha was very disappointed. After God revealed that to this breach of trust, then he lied to Elisha about it and said how it happened, all this. But here's a man who disappointed because of greed. And again, I think of all these, and I think, I know people that are disappointed. They would turn their backs on their own family because of greed. They want things, they want more, and some of the situations but things like position and power and material possessions, they change people. Money changes people. I talked to a fellow this a couple weeks ago, and someone in his family, now I'll be honest with you, I don't think he's changed, but someone in his family had passed away, and unexpectedly left them quite a bit of money, and they're struggling. They'd been struggling for a lot of things, and I noticed he had some work done on his house and a couple things, and I mentioned something to him about it, and he told me what had happened. But as I listened to him and as we talked, the thing that impressed me, he didn't sound any different than he ever did. He's still the same person. He's not about himself. He's not. In fact, he's got a grandson that he's set all kinds of money aside to help this grandson for an education. And when he's gone, and I seen all that, but you don't see that very often because the Bible does tell us the love of money is the root of all evil, and it gets to people and it messes people up. And it's real quickly that you and I come to love things and use people instead of love people and use things. We do that a lot. And so Elisha was disappointed. Now, I think of some more. Some of you thinking, "I'm getting disappointed, preacher. You're going to have to hurry. I'll try to get through some more." But Paul got disappointed in John Mark, if you remember that story there in the New Testament. And in fact, he got so disappointed that him and his best friend come to words over it. Now, think about this. This is two of the greatest preachers that ever was, and over a person, they disagreed and got very harsh in their disagreement. Who was one wrong and one right? I don't know. But listen a little bit about it. It says, "And Barnabas determined to take with them John, whose surname was Mark. But Paul thought not good to take him with them, who departed from them in Pamphylia, and went not with them to the work. And the contention was so sharp between them that they departed asunder one from the other. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and departed, being recommended by the brethren unto the grace of God." Now, again, here's a failure I call just young immaturity and indiscretion. Could I tell you that happens a lot with parents? The kids, they get old, they get to turn teenagers, maybe they get on their own, they just get out and grow their wings or whatever. Sometimes they'll say things that'll hurt the people that's cared for them the most and done the most for them. And sometimes when they're empowered, they'll do things that are destructive. Sometimes kids don't think, and you give them they get their license, they go out the first time, and they do something crazy, and they end up the police call you or something, and it's disappointing. because you thought I could trust him in all these things. And some of you have been through some of those. But I was interested in this. I'm thinking about the different reasons that people disappoint. But when I read those verses there about Paul and Barnabas, I was interested in that, because is it possible for me to disagree with another preacher so strong that we don't even go to each other's church, and yet God still use them? Well, Barnabas went one way and Paul went another way, and they took somebody else with them, and yet God used both of them. And so it's possible. Maybe God wanted 2 missionary groups, and so he let this happen, because, again, I'm saying God's in control of everything. But the fact is, we get disappointed. And then I think about Demas. He disappointed Paul. His failure was he had misplaced values, misplaced priorities. He said, Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed to Thessalonica. The love of the world, the love of power, the love of things, and the way things is in this world, it many times will cause people to lose their commitment for Christ. You know why a lot of people is not serving God today? Why a lot of people that used to be part of Faith Baptist is gone? The world had too much to offer, and we just couldn't keep up. And sometimes churches, they change their music, they change this, they change everything to try to keep everybody in. But if your love for God is gone, you're going to be gone sooner or later anyhow. And so there's no reason for me to walk away from the Bible, walk away from the good songs that uplift the Lord. No reason for us to change all that to try to keep you. If you're going to leave, you're going to leave until you get your heart right with God. And so I'm just thinking it's always a disappointment to see people who are saved leave eternal things for temporary things. And yet you see it all the time. And again, all of us could name people. And I think of it this way. There's probably the greatest disappointment is when it comes to the work of God, because you have higher expectations. I expect more out of people from Faith Baptist Church than I do people that live outside of the church, people who are not saved. I don't expect as much from them. In fact, sometimes we get things mixed up, and we'll see people will say, well, they're doing this wrong, they're doing that. Well, they're not saved. What do you expect them to do? If I wasn't saved, I might be a drinker. I don't know. I've never tried it. So I'm glad I didn't, because I'd probably get hooked on it. But a lot of things might happen to people if they wasn't saved. And so we get frustrated with them. I don't think we should be near as frustrated as we are with God's people when they follow those things. And so it's just the expectations. But in fact, Jesus had every right to be disappointed with people. And you know what? He was, because they all disappointed him. In fact, I remember in one place when it seemed like everybody was leaving him, he said this to the disciples. He said, will you also go away? Everybody else left. Are you guys going too? Disappointment, it happens. And we're all going to carry disappointment and frustration and sadness inside. And for a lot of cases, it's just wounded pride. But when we start turning away in coldness from someone that we once loved, we usually do it because we've been hurt. We usually do it to try to, our pride's been wounded. We usually do it to try to protect ourselves from getting any hurt worse. And that's understandable, but there's better things. What can we do when we're disappointed with people? With those feelings that want us to become cold toward everybody and bitter. And again, the natural temptation, sometimes just say, oh, I'm fine. I talk to people sometimes and they, I'm fine, everything's good, and I know they're not. You can tell by talking to them, and you can see it in their eyes. You can see it when their fist is all clenched. They're not, but it happens. And so if we deny it, things are going to get worse, and we'll probably end up becoming bitter. And we kind of protect. I guess you could say we put a shield over ourselves. So what's a better way? Well, let me mention some things, and we'll be done here. That's what you're all looking for, anyhow. The way to get done. Refuse to withdraw from the world. If people disappoint you, and people hurt you, and people say things, don't decide the whole world's that way, so I'm not going to have a friend. Because I run across a lot of people say that. You go ahead and make friends anyhow. It can be tempting to put up walls, but if you shut out friends, it's possible that God was going to use those friends to help you, and now you've shut them out. And so don't do that. And then I would say a second thing, go deeper with God. You see, friends are essential, and we need them. But no matter how good of a friend you got, sooner or later, if you're close enough, they're going to fail you in some area. You say, well, preacher, I trust you. Don't trust me, because I will fail you. I won't intentionally do it, but I will fail you. People make error in judgments, but God never does. And God said, I'll never leave thee. I'll never forsake thee. He's the friend that sticks closer than the brother. And he's got a pretty good track record, too. I've never seen him fail. I've never seen him go wrong. So it makes sense for me to decide I'm going to trust him. I'm just going to trust God. And so he's our source of strength, and through him, I can learn to forgive people who's disappointed me. Through him, I cannot respond the way they have responded to me. I can do things different. I can stay on a different level. And through him, I can find healing when things hurt and when things has happened. And then I would say this also, when people disappoint you, you may have to adjust your expectations, because sometimes I find we expect too much of people. This one thing I've found a lot. When someone gets saved, you and I who's been saved 30, 40, 50 years, you know what we do? We expect them to live like they've been saved 30, 40, 50 years. And all of a sudden we see them lose their temper. We see this happen. And we say, I don't even know if they're really saved. They don't do this right. They did this wrong. And I have to remind myself, and sometimes I have to remind others, they've not been saved that long. Give them some time to grow. Give them some time to help, and be an encouragement to them instead of throwing cold water on them and making them doubt what they've got. So sometimes we do that. Sometimes we just put too much hope in people, and if all your hope is on people, you're going to be disappointed. Your ultimate hope needs to be in God, in what He has in store for us. So pay attention to that. If a good way, if you're always finding yourself disappointed with people, you've probably got your expectations too high for them, and you may have to change them a little bit. But our most important relationship, I guess you could say, is with God. With Him, there's a way out of disappointments. Think about this. Listen to these verses, and I'll be done. The book of Lamentations says, "This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It's of the Lord's mercies that we're not consumed, because His compassions fail not. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in Him." The next time you're suffering from disappointment, whether it's circumstances, whether it's people, remember this: God's faithful. What if every time He got disappointed in me, He didn't have mercy? I'd have been gone a long time ago. I'm thankful that every morning His mercies are new. His compassions fail not. And I'm going to fail Him. I'll fail you. But I got a God who cares, and a God who picked me up and go on. So my thought tonight is simply this: just trust Him. You need people, but trust God above everything else. And those disappointments, they'll just be part of life, and you'll go on, and you won't let them stop you. Would you bow with me for prayer? Father, we do love You tonight. We thank You for Your word. God, we're not grateful necessarily for disappointments, but God, we're grateful for Your faithfulness when we disappoint You, and You show us that we can also be merciful. God, You show us how we can get through these things, and God, I don't know what's going on in people's lives. I don't know why You chose for us to think about disappointments on this weekend, and we're remembering folks, and God, I guess there's disappointments in a lot of things, but God, we thank You that we can depend on You. We thank You for Your mercy. Thank You for Your love for us. And God, I pray You'd help us to be graceful toward other people. And God, I'm not saying that we condone sin. I'm not saying we okay it. But God, help us to be understanding that people need to grow. And God, help us to be able to forgive and go on. And God, help us as a church to do the same thing, God, that we might grow together. Thank You for what You're doing here at our church. I pray You'll bless during this invitation in Jesus' name.